Hey enthusiasts, welcome to another Access Adrenaline ride review. This time we're covering the amazing Na Fianna Force at Emerald Park in Ireland. Na Fianna Force is a Vekoma suspended thrill coaster based at Emerald Park in Ashbourne, Ireland. This ride is only the second of its kind after Haus Überkopf at Tripsdrill in Germany, and in this video we're going to break down all the ins and outs of this ride, including talking about the park itself with a little bit of its history, as well as what led them to bring people to be Na Fianna. Stick around to find out much more about this amazing ride. Emerald Park, formerly known as Tayto Park, opened near Ashbourne, County Meath in Ireland in 2010. As Ireland's only theme park, it seemed to have that corner of the market all but sewn up, as it opened to good reviews as Tayto Park, themed around Ireland's Tayto brand of potato crisps, or chips to our American viewers. During the early days of the park, it was much smaller than what exists now and had very few rides by comparison to where it stands today, with only a zoo and a children's play park at the beginning, and then it grew up to become a much larger tourist draw with the introduction of the Cuchulainn coaster in 2015. This was a gravity group wooden coaster that stands 105 feet tall. I'll have a separate review coming out on the channel for that very soon. In the early 2022, the park, along with all its elements, lost Tayto as a branding sponsor after the Tayto brand was sold to German company Intersnack. It became known that it would be renamed to Emerald Park in September of that year, with the name officially starting from the 1st of January 2023. There is a range of attractions for all ages at the park, including a number of flat rides, such as the Endeavour, an open-seated version of the Enterprise model, and Rotator, a frisbee-style ride. There's also a number of other activities such as a climbing frame with slides, which has been standing but not operating for a while, and a reasonable selection of children's rides. In mid-2023, it was announced that a new section would be opened at the park, which would become known as Tír na nÓg, or the Land of Eternal Youth. This would play host to not only a couple of flat rides, but also to two new roller coasters. One of them being a Vekoma family boomerang known as Quest. This will get its own review later, but it's essentially similar to Light Explorers at Energylandia in Poland, however, much better themed. And as well as that, a Vekoma suspended thrill coaster, or STC, which became known as Na Fianna Force, and that would be intertwined with Crest. Vertical construction on these rides began in 2023, with both of them opening on the 22nd of May 2024. In a similar fashion to a lot of European theme parks, the rides opened and the theming was completed later, meaning that for a lot of the first and some of the second year of their operations, the rides were half finished in terms of their theming. The first thing you notice as you head down the midway from the rest of the park to Tír na nÓg is the ugly fencing on either side of the midway. I'm unsure as to whether Emerald Park looks to build something on either side of these fences at some point, but it certainly is an ugly feature as you head down towards the comparatively good looking Tír na nÓg section of the park. Once at the boundary sign for Tír na nÓg, you see a couple of things. First, to your left, at the sign is a castle tower, and sticking out the top of it is a piece of roller coaster track. This is the far end spike for the family boomerang Quest that I mentioned a little bit earlier on. Second, and more prominently, you see the towering lift hill of Na Fianna Force framed right behind the border sign. This makes for an excellent photo opportunity, especially if you can get some interplay between Quest and Na Fianna Force during their respective cycles. This isn't always guaranteed, of course, but certainly makes for a fun visual as you head towards the coasters. Once you enter Tír na nÓg, you have two ways to go. You can either go right, which leads you towards the queue line for Quest and a couple of stalls, or left to join the queue lines for Na Fianna Force. While we were at Emerald Park, we got 4 rides on Na Fianna Force, and for one of those, I went solo, with a follower from Instagram, to use the standby queue line to allow us to compare it to the experience a disabled rider may have. In this particular ride, we met a follower called Anna and her family. Hi Anna! I went through the standby queue and managed to witness the entire pre-show of Na Fianna Force, and to be honest, that pre-show, which is right before the station, was pretty good and definitely in keeping with the theme. I'll talk more about the pre-show when I touch on the ride's theming shortly. On the walkthrough, the standby queue line itself is flat, relatively reasonably themed, and takes about 2 minutes to navigate from entry all the way into the pre-show section. The ride has one massive advantage over most others of this kind, because as you head from the queue line into the station area, you'll see that there is no change in elevation whatsoever, meaning that Na Fianna Force becomes the first ride we've ever reviewed to offer completely level boarding. For the queue experience, no matter which entry method you use on Na Fianna Force, it's a solid 10 out of 10, as the mix of theming, limited queuing, and no steps at all makes for a very easy and extremely accessible queuing experience. Well done, Na Fianna Force. And the good stuff doesn't even end there, as we've not even got on board yet. Now we'll spend a brief moment talking about the theming of Na Fianna Force, and this one is certainly an interesting one. From outside the queue line, the station is beautifully themed in keeping with the overall theming of the Tir na Nog area, with a wonderfully textured castle-like structure showing the ride's logo in several places. In the indoor section of the standby queue, there is a projection-mapped pre-show showing the Na Fianna blacksmith explaining the backstory regarding the battle with the dragon, as well as crafting staffs and armour and instructing riders to equip special armour, in this case the ride's restraints, before joining Na Fianna on a battle against a dragon. Inside the station, this theming is further reinforced with shields and bows mounted on the walls. The ride's layout itself doesn't appear to have much theming, save a few stonework-lined trenches as the ride passes through, and a couple of small water splash near misses. However, there's a double station pass-through of quests during the Fianna Force's ride layout, this adds to the general theming as you traverse the layout. Personally, I think it would be good if some form of dragon were present during the layout, if only to help reinforce the theme of what the blacksmith was saying during the pre-show. However, for the most part, I'd say you're not going to be paying much attention to this while you're whipping around on the ride. For the theming then, Na Fianna Force gets a 9 out of 10, only being scored down due to the aforementioned lack of a dragon in the ride experience itself. But that's a good segue into the next section, the ride experience. Once you're inside the station, you select your row or wait for a grouper to assign your empty seats. It is on a first come basis, unless you've used the QAP method of entering via the ride exit, but I found that the ride-ups are generally happy to honour row requests, even if it means you have to wait 1 or 2 trains extra to allow for this. I got 1 front row ride, 1 back row ride a row forward from the back with Claire behind me, and another somewhere in the middle with my follower friend Anna, which is what happened when I took on the standby queues by myself. Once at your row, the familiar story takes place. You wait for the air gates to open, then run across the train to place any loose articles into the storage bins on the other side. When Claire and myself rode together, her husband rode separately on the first ride, and so we asked if the ride-ups wouldn't mind keeping hold of Claire's wheelchair as we rode, to which they were more than happy to oblige. You then take your seats in the very familiar Vekoma suspended coaster trains. You make yourself comfortable and pull down your restraints. These are very simple over-the-shoulder lap bars, quite similar to sort of an inverse version of Formula, Abyssus or Lek Coaster in Poland, but without vests or redundant seatbelts, and so these made for a very easy and very comfortable experience. Once your restraints have been checked and verified, the brakes release and the train leaves the station, and heads around a short right-hand turn and begins to ascend the 102-foot or 31-metre tall lift hill at a reasonably brisk pace. What lies ahead is another masterclass in modern coaster design from Vekoma. Once atop the lift hill, you crest over and begin your descent. This is a right-handed banking drop, which I found from the front didn't tend to do much but hang you over the edge for a second or two, but from the back, it straight up threw you over the crest. Weirdly though, for such a drop, this one has no airtime, and it left me somewhat surprised as I'd watched and read reviews of the similar drop on Howl's Ubercop at Tripsdrill, offering riders a little smidge of flow to airtime, but there was no such joy here. At the end of the drop, you bank towards the right and head through the middle of a subterranean trench. As you head into this trench, just above you, you'll see the dark blue track of Quest over your head, and if you're lucky, you may receive a small amount of interaction between the two rides as their respective near misses interact with each other. In the trench, the sides are beautifully adorned with the stonework that matches the castle's aesthetic that I mentioned earlier. Watch out below, as your feet will narrowly miss the grass just below you. The pull-out from the drop in this trench delivers a nice, forceful blast of G's. You then very quickly rise upwards into the first notable element of this ride, a very sharply overbanked left-hand turnaround. This element offers such a sharp banking it's actually classed as an inversion. It's extremely forceful, and I found it to be the most intense right at the front of the train, as you're literally yeeted into the manoeuvre. Some riders report greying out on this from the front, but I found myself to be just fine on this one, even as I was being whipped out of the turn into yet another trench just moments later. This is a fun inversion, but we've only just got started on fun inversions on this ride. On levelling out from the turnaround, you find yourself in a trench again. Following this, you're then once again thrown upwards and into the first of the inversions that actually classes as one. You're ripped up and over a corkscrew, passing over the top of Quest Station building. Vekoma makes some really good station flyby elements these days. For example, the barrel roll on Legendia's Lek coaster, and the batwing under and around the station of Abyssus at Energylandia in Poland. This particular inversion is one you're literally hurtled through, and your feet will narrowly miss hitting the station as you pass through it. Towards the front of the ride, it feels graceful as you seem to get the best views of the action. However, in the back, you get some pretty reasonable whip. That said, I found that there wasn't really a bad seat on the whole of this ride. However, both the front and back are the Thuzy seats, as it tends to be the two places most enthusiasts will gravitate towards. Na Fianna Force then flies around another pretty good turnaround. This one offers some good Gs no matter where you sit in the train, as well as a great near miss with Quest Lift Hill as you duck and dive under it. Following the pull out from this turnaround, there's a small dip as you zoom through the back wall of Crest Station, this time passing right through it at a much closer level to the below Family Boomerang station. There's no force here, however, thanks to a mixture of what came before it and what's coming up after it, there really doesn't need to be. One thing you will notice is that the ridiculously low clearance envelope around the track, both on the way into and out of the station pass-through, which seems to really accentuate the sense of speed as you come through this element. Pulling out from the second of the two station pass-throughs, you're then once again yeeted upwards, though this time more slightly, as you're sent into a 0G roll. In the front, it once again felt airy and graceful, with a pinch of weak laterals thrown in for good measure. However, when taken from the back, it feels a lot more edgy, as it has some fairly decent whip coming out from it. One thing I found was that the first part of this ride was much more centered to inversions and near-miss elements, whereas the second half that we're about to head into focuses a lot more on positive Gs. And this being a new Vekoma thrill coaster, there are a lot of positive G moments. Speaking of positive Gs, next, you're spiraled upwards by way of a helix. This is a nice element for positive Gs, and the forces on offer here are sustained and very solid indeed. I was amazed that this element didn't cause me to grey out here, owing to the sustained nature of the forces, but nonetheless it's a good helix and offers a short and snappy way of turning the ride around. Exiting out of the helix, you have a good sized drop, and personally I think you'll enjoy this more from the rear rows, because not only are you literally yanked downwards, you'll also be blessed with a teeny serving of airtime. I liked this drop off, it was quite enjoyable and it really made the coaster live up to its name, Na Fianna Force, as it was fairly forceful in the back. As you exit from the forceful drop-off, you're then flung into a very exciting and slightly intense low-to-the-ground S-bend. Vekoma seems to do these low-to-the-ground elements really well. I noticed that also on my review of Formula, which is in a previous video. You're rewarded with a nice blast of positive Gs in each twist on this one, as well as another amplified rush of intensity as you dive underneath Quest, zoom past multiple trees, and feel this ride's amazing sense of speed as you go. Following that little bit of interaction with Quest and the trees, Na Fianna Force leads you into an upwards turn, and serves up yet another helping of positive Gs. Below you, you see Quest disappear into a trench. This serving of positive Gs and interactions with its sister ride Quest really seems to be this particular coaster's strong suit. Sadly, good things don't last forever, as now we're heading to the final section of the ride. And up to now, we've focused on the positive Gs and laterals of the turns, but the final section seems to zero in on a focus towards airtime. Coming out of the previous turn, the ride doesn't let up yet. There's a sudden and almost unseen dip, especially if you're in the back rows. This one offers up some really decent floater in the front, mostly thanks to the speed you're still carrying and the sense of feeling it, but some really solid floater airtime is served up if you're in the back of the train. Vekoma seems to really enjoy making this style of element, as next up is a bunny hill that offers some really good floater airtime no matter where you're sitting. I like the front for the views of it, but the back of the train is where you tend to feel this one more. Coming out of the bunny hill, Na Fianna Force goes into this leftward turn with some nice positive Gs. Beyond the positives, I really didn't have much else to say here. It was nonetheless an enjoyable moment in the otherwise absolute madness that has been the whole thing of this ride so far. Vekoma has really managed to throw everything together in this particular ride, as it focuses on not just inversions, but airtime, laterals, and positive Gs, all in equal measure. As you exit the left-hand turn, you're thrown into this bunny hill that twists you to the right. This is different from most of Vekoma's other attempts at twisted airtime, in that it actually gives a little pop of airtime no matter where you're sitting in the train. This is a nice little element. It also seems to mix in some solid Gs in the rear rows, but not so much towards the front. As you exit this twisting bunny hill, you'll never guess what's next. Another bunny hill! Except this one twists left at the end, offering similar forces as the previous one, delivered basically anywhere you sit in the train. As I have alluded to in previous reviews, these new generation Vekoma restraints are really built for airtime, as they help you feel it in the best possible way, and you don't usually tend to feel airtime all that much on a suspended coaster. After this final turn, you jump up into the really quite long brake run. I was upset to find that this didn't offer the negative G that I thought it might, however I wasn't left disappointed with the overall ride experience here. This upward pop into the brakes is followed by a 90-ish degree left hand turn into the station, where you end your 2,454 foot or 748 metre long experience. So compared to inverts from other manufacturers such as B&M or Interman, this isn't a great deal of track length, but what it throws into this track length is certainly impressive. It definitely marks a very positive turnaround from the SLCs of yore and showcases a Vekoma for the 21st century yet again. The pacing is great, and there are plenty of elements in the ride, and it is a very smooth experience, apart from one ever so slight and almost unnoticeable jolt as you disengage from the lift hill, but I only felt that in back. So where would I rate Na Fianna Force? Well, I really enjoyed this ride experience no matter where I sat in the train, and I thought that the interplay between the station building and track interaction moments of Quest really served to elevate the experience. These new Vekoma 2 ride packages really need to be in more parks. Personally, I'd love to see Alton Towers get one, or even Fantasy Island in Skegness, as this pair of rides would really serve to strengthen their ride lineups. But where would I rate the ride at Emerald Park? Well, Na Fianna Force gets a really well-deserved 9.5 out of 10 for ride experience. There were some dud spots where I thought it could possibly do more, but overall this was a really good starting point for the suspended thrill coaster. Is it better than Hal's Uberkopf? Time will tell for me, but for now, it's certainly up there. So, now we've spent time talking about the theming, queue lines and the ride experience, let's move on to talk about accessibility. And what I'm going to do here is something a little bit different than the old rating system. We're going to bring Claire in to talk about it a little bit more in detail, in a little bit of a question and answer kind of style. So, Claire, how did you feel about the overall accessibility at the park?
Right, well, I have to say that the overall accessibility within Emerald Park was really good, and they really thought about it in detail when implementing access to their rides. Na Fianna's access was fantastic, and it was completely level throughout, even in the regular standby queue.
Well, that's really, really good news to hear as well. How did you think the queue lines compared?
Right, so we sent Phil, who's my husband and carer, for a run through the queue to assess how easy it was to navigate for ambulatory disabled riders, as he knows what he's looking for after caring for me for so many years. He came back to say that both the QAP, Queue Access Pass, and the standby queue were both completely flat, the differences being that the QAP line was much shorter and not as windy, and the standby had the pre-show animation ahead of the loading area.
You know, that's all really good information to know, especially if you're going to be a wheelchair user that's going to be using Emerald Park at all. So, in terms of that, how easy was it to find and use the wheelchair access?
Well, the wheelchair access was a little confusing as there wasn't much signage telling chair users or mobility equipment users to enter via the gift shop. We just kind of guessed and asked the cashier. But once inside, the area to wait is quite small, and I did feel a little bit in the way when riders were exiting, as the shop was quite snug. But once the crowd had gone, we could speak to the ride up and were able to request a preferred row.
That's really good. You don't tend to get an option to select a row in a bigger park. So in terms of that, what was the waiting time like to use this entrance before the ride up came out?
And we waited for only a minute or so before the op came to help. And then after this, we waited for maybe 2 trains to be loaded and sent before it was our turn, even with us requesting specific rows like the front or the back. Though this may take a little longer during peak season when the park is busier, our visit was during the end of season, so wait times were incredibly short throughout the park.
That's really good to know, but how did the ride operators handle your needs?
Well, the ops were super friendly and so helpful. They got me parked up out of the way, then followed me to my row in case I needed help, and took my walking stick once I was seated in the ride. The op then made sure I was comfortable before lowering the overhead lap bar and securing me in. I did forget I had my handbag on, but the op was quick to catch that and took it back to my wheelchair for me. They even double checked that my chair's brakes were on securely and wouldn't roll anywhere whilst I was on the ride.
That sounds like that they were really attentive to your needs there. So in terms of actually getting on board, what about getting yourself seated and then the trains themselves as well?
So Na Fianna's seats are very generous and roomy. They're nicely contoured and quite easy to get into and out of. I, however, am a shorty bum. I have 5'3" and a bit. And even with my 2-inch platforms on, I still had to tippy-toe to get my bottom over the nutbuster, as Jonny lovingly calls it.
Future Jonny hopping in here. It took us 10 minutes to get over the fact we said nutbuster in a funny accent. But now going back to what we were supposed to be doing, Claire, did you find the restraints at all problematic to use?
Actually, no. I found that the newer overhead lap bars are far less restrictive than the traditional over-the-shoulder restraints, which I think would make it a lot more accessible to more riders. There's also the big plus that there's no headbanging against the awful restraints. Overall, it made the ride experience far more enjoyable. Then once we got back to the station, the lap restraints lift easily and are out of the way completely, making it easier to get out of.
Well, that's really, really good to know. How did you find exiting the train and also the accommodations that were made there?
Well, I did need a hand getting out as the seat is set fairly deep, but not super deep that it made it a struggle, like some coasters I've ridden in the past. Just a hand to grab onto whilst I pulled myself up was more than enough. The ride-ups were there straight away with my walking stick, which was very thoughtful of them, and very speedy too. They didn't load the next riders until I was very much out of the way, and then they didn't send the train again until I was out of the station, for my safety and everyone else's.
Okay, well, we've got to the end of it now, so the last question really from me is, if you could give us your final thoughts on accessibility, and also a rating for this ride in terms of accessibility, where would it sit for you?
Right, well, I absolutely love Na Fianna. It's a fantastic ride and the accessibility is just as fantastic. I don't think I could rate it any higher if I tried. The only thing I would suggest to Emerald is just clearer signage, but that's a teeny tiny flaw in a very well planned out setup. It's definitely going to be a 10 out of 10 for me.
Well, that's really served to provide us with some excellent food for thought as we look at parks in the future. Thank you, Claire, for joining us, and we really do appreciate it.
Bye!
If you enjoyed our video and it made you go, ooh, I like this, then there is, of course, a button just for that down below. You are also welcome to comment and provide us with any respectful feedback that you wish. We welcome any feedback, whether that is positive or negative, as it really helps us improve our videos for you guys. What would help us even more is if you subscribe to our channel, as that really helps us out in the battle against the algorithm. We also have a TikTok, which can be found at access.adrenaline, and an Instagram at accessadrenaline. Until next time, I've been Jonny. This has been a video from Access Adrenaline, where we aim to help deliver those theme park thrills for all. Thanks for watching, take care, and we will see you next time. Toodaloo!